Hi guys, nice to see you all, and thanks for coming out today. Part of my presentation is to familiarize you guys with the loss ratio roll forward file that I work with on a day-to-day basis. That way you can gain an understanding of a significant portion of the planning process, the whole planning cycle. It comes up time and time again, not only in my department, but many others. So I'm going to start off by, does sound right to everyone? I'd like to start off by talking about loss ratio and talk about trending loss ratio forward a year. So we have a loss ratio this year. Loss ratios will change over time. I'd like to just do a small brainstorming activity and come up with a couple ideas of what will affect loss ratio and how what will cause it to go higher or lower, say in the next year. Anyone have any ideas? Inflation. That's a great idea. Yeah, I mean the economy is all over the place. We just came out of and the economy tanked pretty in not too long ago. Hopefully it's coming out of the recession. I had estimates that there's over a 10% in inflation in the next couple of years. So my boss was mentioning the other day. Let's hope that won't be the case, because that will certainly affect our loss ratio negatively. And if we don't plan for it, that will not do us well. Any other ideas? Catastrophes. Yeah, another good one. Once we can plan as much as we like for catastrophes, but often they come at a greater rate than we expect. And say we have twice as many hurricanes come through, especially on the East Coast where we have a lot of our business. It could certainly, if we don't plan for it, it will affect our loss ratio negatively. Any other ideas? Yes, another good one. Certainly. Say Obama hits us with a tax that we didn't anticipate. More expenses. I mean, our expense ratio goes up, or rather, saying that it will affect our expense ratio more so than our loss ratio. So our loss ratio is more talking about losses, well, the trend of losses compared to the premium we take in. So I'd say that the law would actually affect the expense ratio more so than loss ratio. Any other ideas? Claims? What about claims? Increase in the size or the frequency? Yeah, both. More claims come in than we anticipate, we will have a higher loss ratio than we expect. If the average claim cost is greater than we expect, again, it will drive up the loss ratio. This is all stuff that we want to plan. So now that we came up with a couple ideas, let's see how it fits in with the file that I work with on a day-to-day basis. So there are three sections of this file. We have our starting point and our end point in the middle. The starting point is in this case, this file is actually from last year, so we'll deal with the 2009 and 2010 loss ratio. Say we're trying to project the 2010 loss ratio. Our starting point is a 2009 loss ratio. Our end point will be 2010 loss ratio. We're just trending it forward a year. But there are certain things we want to take into account beforehand. This particular file, John brought up the point of catastrophes coming in. We have our separate CAT modeling team who specializes with catastrophes. It's a very specific, it's a specific process. We have a team that can track a hurricane. They'll see where it starts. They'll see as it moves up the coast. Obviously, all this stuff we're very interested in because if we see the hurricane is tending towards a state that we have a particularly large amount of business in, it's something we want to plan for that. So A CAT modeling team deals with the catastrophe losses. We, in our department, my file, we don't deal with that. So we want to subtract off this CAT percentage, this CAT loss ratio, a specific CAT loss ratio from the overall loss ratio. So that's what we're doing here to begin with. We start with our loss ratio from 2009, which in this case is 55.7. And we want to subtract out a portion of losses, such as the CAT loss ratio, and then we have a couple of other ratios here. I hope you can see that pretty well. 0.8 is just a provision for adverse deviation from the mean. Basically, sometimes we can make a lot of predictions, but then it's good to have a just have a provision just in case losses come in more than we expect. So we subtract off this portion of losses, and we end up with this 49.1. This represents the baseline losses, as we refer to them. They're the non-CAT losses, the everyday losses, less than $500,000. You go down to the lower losses, they come in more frequently. The less severe, more frequent losses, those are easier to model. They fall in a nice distribution, whereas the CATs are much different. So we have our everyday baseline loss ratio of 49.1. We then apply a certain number of factors to it. As we mentioned, there's an inflationary trend, there's a frequency trend, there's a severity trend. All these things, and then rate change as well, something we didn't mention earlier. We increase our rates, it changes our premium, which is going to change the loss ratio. So we account for all these factors, and then we come up, and we have a formula here which takes all these into account. We apply a couple of other factors. It's underwriting action, another thing that will affect the loss ratio. Say there's a change in practice that we anticipate will help price our business better. Again, it will affect the losses, it will affect the premium, but it will affect the loss ratio, and therefore trying to compensate for it. So we end up with this projected loss ratio of 48.5. So that changed from this 49.1. And you can see what's driving that. It's pretty close. The severity trend, I'd say, is relatively low. Frequency trend, I expect that to be higher, actually. So we then kind of take into account our new business. So when we take in new business, we expect our new business to have a higher loss ratio than our renewal business, which makes sense, right? We price the business. If the losses for this particular business comes in greater than we expect, we'll charge more for it. So we'll better and more accurately price this business. So our renewal policies should have a lower loss ratio than our new business. So say next year we take in more new business than usual, that's going to drive loss ratio to go up. So that's what this is doing. It's showing the portion of our total business from this year, from last year, the loss ratio differential, and throws all this stuff together, comes up with our loss ratio effect, which in this case is 0.0. So that didn't do too much. We went from 48.5 to still to 48.5. So this 48.5 is our next projected, our projected loss ratio, taking this new business into account. And now we go and add back in the stuff we originally subtracted. So according to the CAT modeling team, we went from a 5.9 to a 5.7. Okay, so we're anticipating slightly less CAT losses this year than last year. So we add back in this CAT loss ratio. We add back in the provision for adverse deviation, and we end up with our projected final loss ratio of 55.1. So how did that compare to what we started with? 55.7 down to 55.1? Okay. That may not seem like much, but if you multiply that by the premium that we're working with. We're working with what, $13 billion here. So even as a fraction of a percentage of 13 billion is still a lot of money. So that's so we end up with so bringing it back. Any questions on what I went through there? Does that make sense? You start with the loss ratio. We subtract out what we don't model ourselves, the cats, and adverse deviation. Then we model our base, our smaller losses, using a frequency trend, a severity trend, rate change, exposure. We take into account new business. We end up with our final loss ratio, or our baseline loss ratio. We'll add back in the catastrophe percentage, and end up with our final loss ratio. Does that make sense to everyone? That's right. Good. Well, hopefully you do have a better understanding of this file. And if anyone has any questions, I work with this file on a day-to-day basis. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or that you may come up with. Thanks.